All right, Noel. Now that is one heavily orchestrated entry, and I don't mean that in a negative way. You've really put a lot of thought into massive textures, and textures made massive not just by adding voices on top of one another, but by introducing new functions into the mix, which we'll talk more about as we cover some of those sections. But I don't know if you've been following the latest procedure with my entries, but I've been taking things backwards, evaluating the epilogue first, and then the D section, and then going back to the beginning. So that's what we'll do with your score. Now, just to sort of take it from a bar before, actually, just kind of starting from bum 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 bum. You've got you got all this stuff going on before, and then here you really strip things back, right? And I feel that like you could have kept the pressure up. Yeah, the truth is that you really don't have as much power as you could in the repeating intervals and the kind of arcing figuration and so on. So you really could have kept that pressure on, I think, rather than just going to octaves here, having your violas sort of contribute to this massive E octave here. Yeah, and I mean, you could have actually piled on more instruments. Now, here you have accented staccatos and you have tenuto staccatos. Okay, so the thing about those articulation styles is that, like, what are you trying to say here with the allargando? It's a broadening, right? And it's almost like it's almost like fate shaking its finger at Barvinsky, right? It's like really making sure he understands. Do you know what I mean? That kind of vibe. So do we want, doink 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 doink? Do we really want that kind of, or do we want something more like an accented tenuto? Dun 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 dun. Do we want more of a drag there? Do you know what I mean? And as far as the articulation sound of a tenuto staccato, it's sort of unga, 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 which I think is actually probably closer to the spirit of the allargando than the accented staccatos, which will kind of tend to drown out the violins anyways, especially the trumpets being so much stronger and so much louder. But we'll cover some of those issues of balance later. The main thing is just the build up to E, and here you do not go to decrescendo here, non decrescendo, just as it says in the piano score. But I think that there's a further issue happening here. You fade off to pianissimo here, and that's beautiful. And you leave your horns continuing to play a held sounding B octave. And it's a little. I mean, I feel like it's sort of unnecessarily staggered in like in. I'm not really sure what this achieves. Tying these half notes and then tying these half notes and then tying. Do you know what I mean? Are you trying to give the players a space to sort of sneak a breath or something, or they'll figure out ways. In fact, if they haven't taken a breath already by around here, they'll sneak a breath on the dotted rhythm. Right, this is a customary place to do it. Da 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 da, and the audience completely does not even hear the breath because it fits into the music so well. But I mean, with a tenuto marking under, they probably wouldn't sneak a breath. They just take a nice big breath here. Yeah, and then here I just was like unsure about this too. Like, you know, why is there just one lower B continuing on, and then the upper one is, and then this one is fading. And I mean, I just didn't quite. I mean, maybe you're just trying to sort of lessen the amount of tone weight until you just have this one B going. I mean, I guess if that's the purpose, then that's fine. But wouldn't like, considering that the horns are fortissimo right here, they're going to be forte here, and they're probably not going to be at an equal place, right, dynamically, to where they don't interfere with the contrabassoon. I would bring them down here, and I would just get rid of all this fussy stuff. Just have dotted whole notes, tying. The players do not need to change articulation or change breaths or stuff like that. The focus should not be on them. It should just be on holding the tone steady, right? That is enough of a job for your players. And you should diminuendo down to piano here, and then hold here, and then diminuendo further at the end of the bar with whoever's left. Because like here you're already decreasing the volume, right, of your wind players against your horn player. So I just think you need to work the balance out here a little bit better. And just make it, simplify it. Do you know what I mean? Now I'm seeing this gong roll, and it just really goes on and on and on. And it's happening over and over again. So, here's the thing. I mean, I'm not sure if you mean like a gong, like a nipple gong, or a the more Asian style gong, or if you mean a tam tam. Okay. So in either case, scoring what you have scored is problematic. Okay, because the tam tam or the gong, they each have really different characteristics of being rolled. But like to excite the surface of the gong to the point at which it gets to fortissimo, and then to ease it back down to pianissimo, is not necessarily possible. And then here you have a stroke, like just a bash on there, and then it's just really. I think that the kind of scoring here, it's almost like you really should have 2 or 3 different tam tams or gongs going at the same time to get different effects. Like a different instrument could be hitting this, if you know what I mean. So, because the player kind of has enough to worry about. I mean, here's the thing, is that when you have basically a piece of sheet metal, like a cymbal or a gong or a tam tam, the surface gets excited, and it builds and it builds and it builds in vibration, and it wants to keep vibrating. So like the whole idea, like a snare drum, imagining that one of these instruments was like a snare drum, where like you roll it and you roll it up to a fortissimo, and then you roll it back down to a pianissimo. That's not how the surface of the metal wants to behave. It will get excited, and it will want to stay excited for a while, because it is vibrating, and the vibrations are they're just sort of building on one another. So if the player will essentially roll up with very, very fast strokes, and then to get this effect, they would have to just barely like tap it to kind of, actually really what they want to do is bring down the vibration. But especially with a tam tam, which has got such a huge surface area, it is not going to want to roll down to a soft dynamic so quickly as you have scored right in here, right? So this is all problematic. But the biggest problem here is that this is a place where the music is supposed to achieve a certain effect that was shown in the piano score. Like in the piano score at E, the pianist ends on this big bashing chord, and then after 3 beats of fermata, they, and the sound of the chord has decayed, they lift up and they're on all of the notes except for the held Bs, right? So that's the effect that we're going for. That is where the focus is. And then here you're throwing in another one of these rolls, only to mezzo forte, but it still is distracting from the entire purpose, which is the setup of this contrabassoon solo, right? So all eyes should be on this. I would say just allow your listener to achieve some peace, right? I think that this is completely unnecessary for your dramatic purposes, right? It's just gilding the lily. It's you know, yeah, or even more than that. It's like it's like you're going to build this beautiful room, add this little room onto your house, but it's like the only tool available is a sledgehammer, right? For this bar. So just really be careful about things like that, right? So because there already is a problem in the whole idea of rolling up to a fortissimo and then rolling down to triple P just like it was nothing, because like the like I said, the instrument doesn't want to behave that way. Once it's achieved a certain amount of force, additional little strokes to the instrument just make it more excited, even if they're not that, even if you think, oh, it's cooling the instrument down. No, it's just adding to the momentum of the build. Well, not to get too tied up in that, but it's just a real concern about how this is really cooling down and introducing this next really soft, beautiful, gorgeous part. All right, so contrabassoon coming in here at mezzo forte. And here you've chosen to go portato. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with that effect, but that's what you have essentially ended up scoring. I would not score a slur from a portato into a held note. I would just like have the slur last as long as the tenuto marks, right? So when you put a slur under tenuto marks, you get this kind of throbbing sound. So it's better to go tongue. And the same thing here. Tongue. Da, 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 da. Yeah. And then like in here, your tenuto your portato is more judiciously slurred. Yeah, it's just slur the group of tenuto marks. But then here you slur forward, like, and it's just like it's really unconvincing, Yeah, it just really doesn't have the same definition as ta. Do you know what I mean? Ta. All right, so there's a lot of cool stuff here. There are a few little problems, but it's interesting that you've got the English horn and solo flute in octaves here. I think that works pretty well. I mean, it's not such a great balance at the beginning, because like the very lowest note of the English horn, which you scored here, can be a bit murky and mushy, and it can still be, it can still share some of the problems that low oboe notes have. Like, here you've scored all of these really soft notes in low oboe, and like the thing about it is that they are possible, but it really just takes a first-rate musician, first-rate oboe player to get them to behave. So if you were planning on sharing this with like a community orchestra or a semi-pro orchestra, don't be surprised, if you get a lot of really fat kind of sounds down here. So what I'm just saying here is that like it really would take first-rate musicianship to balance this, starting in the first octave of the flute and on this very, very low note in the English horn. And it all has to do with the reed that the player is using too. Anyway, so my feeling about it is that if you were going to just lose the flute anyway, and this note, this higher octave note of the melody is going to become oboe, it would just be a much safer and more balanced melody note above in the first oboe rather than in the flute, right? Because here I feel like you've got the dynamics backwards to begin with, like mezzo forte on the English horn, and that's matching everybody that's above. But with mezzo piano on the flute, with how you got it scored here, the overtones of the English horn, which should be working like copacetically, to use a fancy word, with the flute will actually start to overwhelm them. It won't totally overwhelm them, but it just is not. It's obviously uneven with the dynamics. I mean, if you were to mark the flute forte, dolce, then it would be a much more realistic balance. It's hard to tell which part is espressivo here. Like, is it the flute? Is this intended here, or is this like a preview of what's intended for the oboe? I'm guessing that it's the flute. So maybe it just got bumped over here or something. So all the more reason for these parts to have the same dynamic, or even greater for the flute, if possible. Even to the point where you could have marked your English horn mezzo piano and your flute mezzo forte, just reversing this. All right, all right. So here you are, like, doing this thing where you throw in this low B. Now, why do we need this low B when it's already in the English horn? Right? Yeah. So, look, I mean, if you've got clarinets, if you've got bass clarinet, if you've got bassoons sort of playing around these middle register notes, I would say just give them, like, have your other players cover these low, like this second oboe part, if possible. If you really want to go down to pianissimo on a low B in your oboe part, give it to somebody else. This you already have the C in the bassoon here, right? Why not give the B to your first bassoonist, right? And here, same thing. You have this B right here in your bassoon part. Yeah. And here you have this E in your bassoon part. So like like you are really covering a lot of these notes in other parts, which can play them with much more subtlety and dynamic control than that lowest B. And it just really would take good playing. And I'm not saying that, like, here I'm saying good playing. Well, I'm expecting good players. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, could you make it a little easier? Right? That's the point. Right? It's not so much that it is impossible to play, but that it really takes a lot of focus and a lot of it just really intense training and so on and so forth. So I would just say, like, look, if you are an unproven composer, orchestrator, whatever, you get real excited about this whole process and you want to take this to an orchestra and get them to play it, you know what to fix, right? Just try not to put too much pressure on the expectations in certain scoring. Okay, so here we're going to this melody, octaves in first oboe and English horn, and that's all great. And you're adding a little bit of contrabassoon below. This harmonization in here. Yeah, it's all fine. Yeah, I sort of feel that, like, A clarinet and B flat B clarinet, like, we know that bass clarinets are all in B flat. Like, it's almost never would you ever see a bass clarinet part be in any other key. We also know that this is the key of G, and we can see that the key signature for the part is A major / F sharp minor if you're thinking that this is a minor piece. So we don't need the B flat. Same thing with the A clarinet. We know it's a clarinet. We don't really need the A here. And F horn. We know that the horn is, we can see the key signature, and horns are just in F, right, for the most part. So we don't need this either. We don't need the tuning. All we need is horn, B cl, right? And even here, you could just say EH instead of E horn or E. Yeah. So and then like gong, I'm just really kind of not sure whether you mean tam tam, which is like I mean Asian gongs. I mean all gongs are essentially from Asia, but like the what is sometimes called an Asian gong in instrumentation circles. It's a heavier instrument with this sort of big nipple in the middle, and it has a real tuned sound to it. It doesn't have that expansive nebulous sound of the tam tam. So I think putting it in here, you'd get like if you really are talking about a gong, you would get like a really pronounced musical tone emerging. I think you mean tam tam. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll get back. We'll get into this. I'm getting ahead of myself. About the biggest thing I'm concerned here with is that when you go down to pianissimo here on the flute, it just like and here you have mezzo piano in your melody, and that's great. And I've been worried about people overbalancing the accompaniment, making it too strong. But you sort of set a trap for yourself by making the accompaniment so very soft, and not giving anybody not sharing the crescendo mark, which is scored here in the piano part, right? And having everybody come back to the same dynamic right here, which the music sort of balances itself. You lose the implied leap here, da da dum ba dum, and then you're making things even more complicated by having, by adding the piccolo part, which walks up to the A, da 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 dum, bum 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 bum, and under that you've got da 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 dum. So by putting the A up here, we lose the implied leap. It just really becomes all about reaching the pitch of A in your various different instruments. So just watch out for that. I think you might have missed that. And this is why it's really, really, really important. I can't stress this enough, folks. Really listen to the way it's performed on piano, because I'm seeing a lot of things which kind of suggest like a focus on the score rather than on the performance, or the score more than the performance, right? So try to really balance those. Have continuously or frequently go back to the performance and listen to how the pianist is playing it when you approach a passage, right? And just think about all of the implications. Like Doloroso. Doloroso comes with a crescendo mark, right? He's saying sadly, it's like increase your sadness here, right? And then at the end of the phrase, there's sort of an implied diminuendo, really. So it's like he doesn't write it in, but it's really obvious from the way that the piano part works. All right, and then we've got this in here, da 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 da. Yeah, well, this is all right. Yeah, and here you're just really pushing a marcato tenuto right in here. It's in a slightly odd place, but I mean, it's kind of fun. It kind of works. I'd say leave it in. Yeah. And then I like the way that your solo violin comes in here a little early, and then settles on that E, and there's this lovely G chord below it. I don't know if I'm so keen on a solo oboe under an octave under the solo violin. Did you notice how in your mock-up the sound of the oboe absorbed some of the sound of the solo violin? Right, so that's something that the players would have to really be watching out for to balance. Like you're saying, well, I'm having this is marked down by 1 degree dynamically, so that shouldn't happen, but it will happen to a degree anyways in live performance. The the oboe is going to want to its overtones are going to absorb some of what's above it. And then da. I mean, do you want da or do you want da da? Yeah. And then English horn coming in. Yeah, I mean, and then once again you're settling on a soft low B. Yeah. I almost feel like you would get a better result if you were to dovetail on this note, right? If you had your English horn come in here, and then you had your bass clarinet dovetail on this note. So the English horn did not have to go to the low B. And this is all fun. You have some strange, like, reversed stem directions. Why would that be? What are you doing in your application that makes the stem directions go the wrong way? All right. Yeah, and here too, right? Shouldn't the central note of a staff point down with its stem, the middle line? And of course, this should be pointing down as well. All right, now here you are fading down to an extreme dynamic. Okay, so I want you to go and check out my latest tips on orchestrationonline.com. If you just go to the home page, it will have the second tip of a series of 2, and you can actually just click on the blogs button without there's a when you put your mouse pointer on the blogs button, like the menu drops, but just click on the option at the top, blogs, and it will have all of my posts in order. So check out check out the 2 posts that I made on extreme dynamics, right? So 2 Ps is extra soft, 3 Ps is as soft as a player can play musically. In other words, having all of the nuances, control, intonation, everything that is absolutely possible on that instrument musically. And then and that is usually the limit for certain instruments of getting soft. And in particular, the very instruments that you have chosen here, with the exception of your clarinets. So double reed instruments really cannot get below a triple P meaningfully. Okay, and here you've given them quintuple P. But to go on with our little explanation, quadruple P is as soft as a player can play non-musically, right? So like that would be niente, right? So like you lose a lot of nuance, flexibility, tone color, all of those other things when you go down to a niente. So that's like right on the very edge of being able to hear the tone of the instrument. Now when you go to 5 Ps, that is basically just it is more about the sound of the air blowing through the instrument, or the bow whispering across the strings, rather than the actual tone of the string itself. Okay, so that's my philosophy of extreme dynamics, and it's borne out by just listening to how players deal with certain dynamic markings and how certain general trends in composing. And of course, they're not universal. And I know that you have a different meaning here, but really, you cannot get below a triple P on a meaningfully on a double reed instrument, right? So that knocks this off. Now, if you had somehow scored all of this in say flute and clarinets and bass clarinet, then you would have been able to really get down to the merest whisper, past niente. All those instruments can do that, especially flute in its lowest register. But I think that this is just so soft. It's not quite realistic. All right. Then we have another little touch of tam tam or gong, or I'm not sure what it is. Right. I should have checked with you on this before, just because it just eats up time. But I mean, there's only so much I can put into a checklist or recommendations or guidelines, like so the use of the word gong for tam tam, I mean that actually shows up in some great scores that people read all the time. So it's not confusing. I mean, it is confusing, but it's not inexplicable that somebody might use the word gong for tam tam. But like, I don't want to. For all I know, you do mean a gong, like a more like of a gamelan type of a thing, or a Chinese gong. So yeah, but it's a beautiful idea, but you don't really need to do. You don't need to. I mean, you don't even need the dynamic marking at all. Just make sure everybody is pianissimo at the beginning, and then just mark a hairpin, and I think everybody will fade out beautifully. So you have to think about this. Like, to a certain degree, wind players and brass players will shape their notes, and they'll shape the end of a diminuendo, okay? And they will bring it down to nothing without you having to tell them to do that. But it's a different kind of nothing than niente, right? So niente, which it seems that you're suggesting here, niente is just to really beautifully, gradually, and steadily bring it down to a point of, it's just like sliding a fader down in a mix, right? So very few instruments can do that. However, shaping the note so that you don't really hear, like, so that the release is beautifully and just very gracefully releases, so that just it really, there's a curve to it. Yeah, that is something universal to wind and brass instruments. It's like the most common thing in the world, and beginning wind players work on it all the time. Okay, just to get that beautiful shape. So it's inherent in the diminuendo mark from pianissimo. So you don't need this marking at all. It's an exaggeration. Forget it. Get rid of it. And make sure that your English horn player has got the pianissimo mark here, like everybody else, and then just leave the diminuendo mark going towards the end, and you're fine. All right? And now, back to D. And, yeah, I mean, I feel it's a little unfair, my procedure here, because it's not really giving people a chance to, like, look at the process of you adding more voices and so on. But I think that we'll be covering that when we go from A through to C, okay? So let's just start off with, like, how this carries on from the C section, right? And we'll cover the C section in more detail, probably in about 20 minutes or so. So, first thing is just to look at the efficacy, like whether or not this is going to work in the way that you have got it scored. All right. And just starting with the cascading octaves, because I feel that has been the biggest problem for most people, including me. It is really something that I tried to get true to the composer's intentions as much as possible. Now, like, to a degree, you set up something where you are using this kind of dun 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 dun, like this sort of heartbeat rhythm here in your heavy brass, and you have certain beats of that emphasized by the trumpets, which in turn trade off with the alternating octaves that are cascading through here. Okay, all right. So the whole question is whether or not that represents a realistic sounding transcription of those octaves. Like, will they maintain their balance against the other parts? So, I mean, the main problem, of course, is that we have the melody, and you've added this additional idea here of these runs. Now, just a big question here is, did you forget to slur these? Because without the slurs, what you're hearing in the mock-up is very similar to what you will hear in real life. You'll hear the I mean, so do you really want that sort of furious back and forth bowing, that sort of détaché kind of a sound? Or do you want like a smoother yeah, 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 yeah? Do you want? I mean, you could slur each beam group or slur each half bar, or I would actually really prefer slurs here. I think that the slurs would actually help the help us to hear the cascading octaves better, because they would have a different articulation style. So here's saying, forte, sempre, crescendo, and then this descends in here. And you have your cascading octaves set up as mezzo forte in the upper winds, and then here, like this, the bass clarinet and the your lower winds here are all like piano, right? With a little bit of a push here, but then because of this and the tremolo and so on. But then they come back down to tremolo octaves. And you keep putting this little push in here. I think if there is any part that shares in the sound of this, it should share some of that push. So I noticed, like here you have the tuba part playing mezzo forte, but shouldn't it be piano by the time you get to here? Because otherwise, this is really going to these staccatos are really going to point, like they're going to stick out of the sound picture. So I think it would be better for you to say mezzo forte here and then piano, and just continue with that. So you have these cascading octaves, but like here you drop down to mezzo forte, but that's still the same dynamic as your cascading octaves, right? And yet here you have a very, very slow build. But that build is not shared by by this new part that you've stuck in here. So shouldn't you say poco a poco forte? Poco a poco crescendo. And then I think like here too, it would be better to say poco a poco crescendo, and then everybody will understand that you mean this very, very slow hairpin, or this very long hairpin. So just take a quick look at this, at how this is set up with all of these long, very, very gradual hairpins, and then look away really suddenly, and then look back at it and look away. So that's really what the player is going through. Like they're looking at their staff, and they're taking a quick look at the conductor, and then they're taking a quick look at their instrument and looking back and forth, in this sort of triangular pattern. Probably most of the time on the sheet music, but like sometimes spent looking at their fingering, sometimes spent looking at the conductor, especially when the conductor really wants them to pay attention to them, right? And it's tricky moments like that, like when you've scored something that's incredibly difficult, that really requires eyes on the instrument, but it's also really intense in the score when you really need the conductor to provide leadership in a very nuanced way, or in a very obvious way, but is very specific to bringing the players together, and it's really difficult to read on the page. So you sort of set this triple trap for the musician. But, that's why they're professionals. However, this is adding just a level of unnecessary linear complications. I would say like the thing that eats up the player's focus unnecessarily is horizontal images that like kind of go on and on, like dashed lines for poco poco crescendo, or really, really long crescendo and diminuendo lines. They sort of start to blur in to the staff, right? The staff lines. If you look here, like the staff lines, the spacing between the staff lines and the crescendo mark are about the same, right? So it's just really easy for things to get confused. So really, just that's what poco a poco crescendo is for, right? So write that in here, and then in your mock-up, just make sure, like maybe in Sibelius, it would be an invisible object, right? And shouldn't all the instruments share that then? Right? That they should all, if they're all heading to forte here, shouldn't they just, have just a little bit at a time? Doesn't have to be very much, right? Because you're just going to a forte here. You're not going to fortissimo, you know. And then here, like you really aren't increasing the volume of your accompaniment in your lower strings, are you? Right? Whereas like you're pushing certain parts, like here, this is forte, this is fortissimo. What's going on with the strings? Maybe did you forget to increase the force down here? Yeah. And then there's like the issue of, what is this roll doing? The roll and like, and here starting loud in the gong, and like, this is sorry, I sort of sounded like Richard Nixon throwing a fit, or how comedians would portray him throwing a fit, flapping his jowls around. But that's the sort of, it should like it. The player's going to come in and they're going to have to sort of hit the gong hard and then bring it down. And you might have been better off just with strokes. Like if this is a tam tam, I would just go boosh, and then let it decay. There's no need to have a roll, right? I mean, if you listen to the mock-up, it's almost as if there's this weird coughing or disturbance. There's a disturbance in the force. There's a disturbance in the middle of each bar that, I mean, it doesn't really do a whole lot for the beautiful construction of all these other things. It's less clear, like it distracts from all these beautiful lines that you've got here. It distracts from, like, I mean, I can't even hear what's going on here in these octaves here. So it disconnects the cascading octaves from the connection down to the lower part. Maybe it's too much, Noel. You know what I mean? And then there's sort of it's odd here. You're using in one percussion part, you're using a quadruple beam tremolo to indicate a roll, and then in another percussion part, the timpani, you're using the trill sign. So just use the triple beam or the quadruple beam. I would say I don't think you need to go above, like unless like with Sibelius, for instance. I don't think it's this way anymore with certain sound sets, but in Sibelius, it used to be that you could only activate a true tremolo, unmeasured tremolo, by using 4 beams. And I think that's not. I think with Note Performer recognizes a triple beam tremolo, except at very low tempos, as being a true tremolo, like just rather than going da 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 da. So so just use the triple beam tremolo. I would say you could use it for the gong too. Use the triple beam tremolo mark. Don't use the trill marking. And then the same thing here. I mean, what if the trill marking has a collision with something above it repeatedly because you have had to condense the page so much in order to get it all into one sheet? That wouldn't happen with the triple beam tremolo, right? Seriously, the trill is old fashioned. The triple beam is modern. Use the modern technique, because that is the one that is. It is there for a reason. It has evolved because of what the players need. Okay, and the same thing that like the wavy line glissando is actually some kind of a more old-fashioned way of writing it. Just a single straight line. Like once again, horizontal complications. Like the more that you overload something with horizontal information that doesn't need to be there, the like for instance, do you need to say gliss on every single line? No. So all you need is a straight line that says gliss the first time, which even there you don't need it because mostly the harpists understand what that means. So you have this straight line with a gliss on it, and then a straight line without the gliss, and a straight line without the gliss. That's all you need. You don't need the wavy line. I mean, it looks great. It makes you feel like more of a composer, and that's fine, but you don't need it otherwise. So if you don't need it otherwise, the harpist doesn't need it. It's not about what we need to make us feel good. It's about what the harpist needs, right? So So, we really are focusing on like how this is all working, and I keep getting distracted from the whole purpose of, the whole focus of, do the cascading octaves work? Okay, so why? I kind of keeping going back to Uncle Roger. Why so weak? Why is this so weak? Why are here you have an accented staccato marked for your harp, but it's mezzo piano. Meanwhile, all this smooth, the occasional staccato and tenuto and slurs and so on and so forth is marked mezzo forte in your winds. So what's the explanation for that? Couldn't you just mark the harp mezzo forte or forte, right? Anything that the winds and the strings are doing in a sort of a complicated pattern and so on, the harp should be doing marked louder if you really want the proper kind of balance. And then we go forward. Here you're saying mezzo forte, and then forte is late, right? Here mezzo forte, and then this goes to forte, but this is still at mezzo forte, right? Yeah, so you just really are weakening your harp part right at the time it needs the most help. Then here, this should go to treble clef, right? And this could have an ottavo mark over it. All right. So now let's talk about the melody. Sorry to atomize this so much, but I was hoping to get up this morning and to just really breeze through my first evaluation, because I'm doing 3 or 4 today, trying to get them done by Christmas. And then, of course, the first thing I look at is the most heavily orchestrated evaluation of the day. But that's fine. It's all fair. Yeah, so let's simultaneously look at the melody and this new added thing of the sort of the figuration. It's really cool too to have this descending. But I mean, it's a problem if you're saying forte sempre crescendo, and then it goes to mezzo forte, and then I'm not really clear about this. Forte pianissimo sempre crescendo. So which one is which? What's going on here? What's that pianissimo mean? Does it belong to the part below? I don't get it. And then there's the further issue that you have no doubling of your melody here in winds or brass. So it's all being carried by the strings. Yeah, see, and the same thing here. You have pianissimo. So it's like you're putting the pianissimo mark above, but then you still have the crescendo mark below, and it's just and the sempre crescendo. So this is sempre crescendo that is intended to be below the staff. I see. And this is forte. Okay, it's a mess, Noel. Pianissimo should be here. You don't need to say sempre crescendo, and you don't need this, as I said before, poco crescendo. And yeah, don't say sempre crescendo, because that is something more of a pianistic kind of a. It's more for piano, where there's an accumulation of energy at the beginning of the passage, right? So that's just we're just pushing and pushing and pushing, right? And that's all very subjective, but you can't use that kind of marking on an entire orchestra, right? It would be better just to say poco crescendo, because that's really ultimately is what you mean, right? So just write out poco crescendo and just ditch the long hairpins. All right, but back to this. Since you're going to VZ, and you have this big stack of, or you have not a big stack, but you have octaves here, and then you have your violas sharing the harmonized part. So essentially every part of that octave sitting on top of the harmonizing thirds is at half strength, right? So half strength, half strength, half strength, half strength. And then you're adding these other parts. And I mean, that's all cool, that's all fair. It's just the question of will it get overwhelmed by everything else around it? That is the question, right? That the mock-up cannot solve. So my suspicion is that even in the best of circumstances, that your melody is going to be a bit weak. And here you have an English horn player doing nothing at all. And that English horn player could be pitching in and playing and thickening up the second violin line at the very least. Is there anybody else who could be helping out with that? Is there any other part in here that is being just doubled by another player? So maybe that could be just left to the other player. And well, you've got your bass clarinet player, and they are doubling the second bassoon. Do they have to double the second bassoon? Considering that the second bassoon is mostly being doubled by the contrabassoon. Could the bass clarinet be playing one of the viola lines? And so on. Right? So just, think about like possible doublings. And then here, like when you drop the octaves, which you don't need to do, and I'll talk about in a minute. This is a point at which the flute could start helping out with the violin, right, and doubling it and giving it a little bit more strength. So yeah, now right in here, I just talked about this, the octaves dropping, okay, and that is not necessarily like a musical choice made by Barvinsky, because of the way he wanted to shape the overall passage. The decision to drop the octaves, I believe, has something to do with keeping the focus of the eyes in the part on the hands in the center of the piano because of the secondary part, the ya-da-da-da, which, by the way, you really have, it's just scored right in here. There's almost no support for the middle voice anywhere else. Well, there is no support anywhere else than the violas. I mean, it still sort of works in the mock-up, but in real life, I think people will be actually hearing the trumpets more than they hear anything else, especially once you get to the forte section. And, the trumpets and the trombones. And wow, boy, howdy, this tuba is going to stand out like a sore thumb because you haven't balanced it with the lower brass down in here, or the, Anyway, all right. So the octaves are dropped because Barvinsky wants the pianist's hands to focus on the center of the piano, and he's worried that, like, keeping the octaves up high, it might have been something that he tried doing when he was scoring it as a piano piece, and just found that it was easier to have the octaves dropping down to where he could see them a little bit more easily, right? But just because that happens on piano doesn't mean that it has to happen for you in your score. You could keep the octaves high and keep them audible. The more you drop down here, while everything else is starting to surge and get bigger and bigger, the more that the octaves disappear. Now, in your case, you have so heavily scored the octaves and so on that it's not the biggest issue in the world. But then you've got this growing and growing in power. And that is a further distraction, right? These rolls on the gong or tam tam. I wish I knew which one, but I mean either way, I think you get the best effect if you just have a little roll and then if you were to do like a roll and then a tie to a note that decays. I think that's probably what will end up getting played anyways, right? Okay. All right, and that leads us to the sort of Ravel section, and it's cool that you've got your divisi strings and so on, so that you can score out each pitch without any extra pitches on the staff. So they're all accounted for in various divisi staves. All right, so it's really becomes this kind of surging Ravel-like string texture, and you keep the little chugging rhythm going in the the sort of leaping octaves, but once again, this stuff in the middle is obscuring the function of the octaves, even though you quite cleverly scored them in your lower heavy brass or across the heavy brass, including the trumpets. Yeah, and it's a sort of a set it and forget it kind of an approach, right? So once you figured out what all the functions are, you're not really evolving the texture or anything like that, or pushing towards anything, or shaping it. It's just like the functions are sort of sitting in their lane and continuing on. So I keep using that term, set it and forget it. Okay, and it's not meant to be a negative one, but it's meant to sort of challenge people, right? Do you want to set it and forget it? Or do you want even a big, like you work out all of the functions for the first bar or two, and okay, that works great. So let's just keep going with all of those functions through the rest of the passage, right? So what is the consequence is that the worst thing that could possibly happen is that by the time you get to bar 5 or 6, the audience thinks consciously or subconsciously, oh yeah, I get it. And then they just wait through to the end of the passage. So I think that it's better to take something like this, some big, massive, broad texture, in concert music. I'm not talking about like in crossover music where the orchestra is accompanying a, like, say, a choir or a pop musician or who knows what. In my case, Chinese instruments. That's something I have scored for, particularly Erhu. Yeah, so that's a kind of crossover music. So in that kind of scoring, it really would be better for you to leave that, once you've got a really nicely worked out texture, just leave it where it is. But in something like this, I feel that there's even more possible. Now, you do get a bit of a textural change here when you go to marcato accents here. But the real, the functions really have not changed all that much, right? You're going from unga 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 unga, with your trumpets to, tan 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 tan. Yeah. And, that further puts pressure on everything else that's happening, right? So this really could get huge with your trombones and trumpets. And, it'll definitely shout out over what's going on the violins. The violins at this point will just be a tiny color behind behind your trumpets, and the same way that the violas just never really had much of a chance against the trombones, right? But at least right in here, your violins had a little bit of a chance to sort of shine through, being played an octave above the trumpets. But once you really push the trumpets up there to these high pitches, then yeah. And then, like, how long can you have your first trumpet player blast away at a high C sharp, and then a B, like all marcato accents, right? At least the part is descending. So yeah, I mean, I will leave it to my trumpet players in the audience to say how much they would or would not like to play that high C sharp. Generally speaking, C is a good, safe place to. C natural is a good, safe place to have a limit. Now, Schoenberg sends the players up to D, and and I've seen C sharps as well, and I've even seen the occasional E and E flat way up high played on a C trumpet or a B flat trumpet, sounding a whole step lower. And some people have a philosophy of E being the new high note and G being the new high note and stuff. And like if you listen to jazz players, they can push it all the way up to B flat and even higher sometimes. I heard John Faddis, the great, the great John Faddis. He actually conducted an entire evening's worth of Duke Ellington written. It was mostly stuff written for orchestra that had a lot of jazz breaks and stuff in it. So he was conducting it and he was playing his trumpet, and he got his trumpet all the way up to like the highest C on the piano and higher. And he was doing it in a way where those pitches were absolutely beautifully, the intonation was absolutely perfect, right? It wasn't like just him sort of wailing around and squeaking up there, which he did from time to time. So I'm saying it's not just him doing that, but occasionally he would just reach up there and just, add a C and add a C on top of that and add a C on top of that, and it was all perfectly in tune with the orchestra. So some trumpeters have lips like that. But to have the kind of lip that is able to do many kinds of playing, over the course of 2.5 octaves is a little different from being a jazz player that's mostly playing high pitches and mostly has that kind of lip, right? It's sort of like reeds for a double reed instrument. Like there might be different reeds that are more useful for different kinds of playing. And so the bassoonist might just quickly switch a reed when they have to do a lot of low notes in a row, and then quickly switch it to a different reed when they have like a bunch of tenor register solos. Okay, but like for the jazz player and the concert player and so on, like they only have one set of lips. So it takes an unusually skilled and gifted and lucky player to to be born with and then develop the kind of lip that it takes to play equally well in all registers in all situations. So just really be careful when you score a high C sharp like this. Okay? So there's like it's you have to think about all these things that I just talked about and more. All right. So, but this just is just getting back to like the whole question of progressing the texture. Like once you get past the first 4 bars, and then you're heading for this. Speaking of high C sharps, da 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 da, and here instead of going down to the F sharp, you add another F sharp, bum bum bum, and that's all cool. You got a piccolo player; they're not doing anything here. They could really be fattening up this high F sharp, couldn't they? But right in here, like after having really spread harmony here, I really love the way that you have such a powerful melody. But here, like now that you've solved that problem, maybe you've solved it too much. Maybe you are putting so much focus here on the melody and so little on the accompaniment that is the whole key to progressing the texture right there. Maybe some of your wind instruments could be trading off accompaniment riffs with your brass. Maybe the brass could be joining in on the melody. Yeah, by the way, I don't like this, and neither will your standard publisher and conductor and so on. Don't separate the horns from the heavy brass. Right? Just if you have a single solid bracket here, that is the key to what the what the bar line should be. Right? All right. Okay. So, but back to this. I really think you could easily progress the texture here and find new ways of making it even more and more exciting. But I really do like this leap. That's very, very cool. Yeah, but I'm just puzzled why the piccolo didn't come in and help out a little on some of these high notes, just to firm them up a little bit. Anyway, so I think and then like you then once again like you just have constant. So you hear 2 cymbals and then 2 gongs, which I'm assuming is tam tam, like, and then just like before, and then that shouldn't just be the same kind of roll mark here rather than the word trill. Anyways, so this really is putting a big it's just really putting a big bunch of noise right in the middle of each of your bars, and it's also problematic in terms of like rolling to fortissimo and then expecting to roll back down to pianissimo. So generally speaking, like the roll, once again to get back to this, the roll will increase the flare. You'll hit this flare on the metallic surface of your tam tam or gong, and then like if the player continues to rolling but soft, like the metal is still flaring and it's still excited. So but like the player might actually have to sort of damp it slightly. Maybe percussionists out there have got some techniques of how to bring down the roll after something like this. But I just know that I've having scored something like that frequently in one piece, just really being told off by a percussionist about it. Okay, but I mean they weren't the most competent percussionists in the world, but that was their piece of advice that they really wanted to give me a piece of their mind about. So so just like like the melody is hugely strong here. The accompaniment could be stronger. There's a lot of sort of thumping away at the downbeat or at the strong beats of the bar, and which with players that could be doing something else. You know, all you need here is a bass trombone and a couple of horn players. You don't need all four of them in octaves, I think. So, yeah, I think that you could lighten up the melody a little bit. It is powerful. It is like, I think it's 2 to 3 times as powerful as it needs to be here compared to the weight of the accompaniment. Yeah. So you could easily progress your texture. There are so many resources available to you if you use them. All right, and if you have this kind of thing, do you mean, like this is going to get a raised hand at rehearsal. Like the player will say, do you mean that you want us to go da 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 da, or do you want us to go da, right? So do you mean a slur here? Do you mean a like, and this kind of thing also gets the raised hand at the rehearsal. Like is this a tremolo beam, like an unmeasured tremolo beam or a measured tremolo beam? Because there are so many scores in which this is misused. Like the literal interpretation of what you've written here is for separate bows to be used on separate notes going yet up and down. So that's literally what you're writing here. But it might be interpreted by some players to mean triple beam or quadruple beam tremolo, depending on the tempo, and to be slurred. So yeah. So what's the solution? Noel, it is to write out the first beam group of what you intend, or the first half bar. So the first half bar, just write out exactly what you intend by this abbreviation, and then continue on with the abbreviation. And that absolutely clears everything up for the score reader, me, right? The conductor, the player, as most important of all, the copyist. So yeah, so this, like, if you don't clarify what this means, then the player is going to ask for it, and you've just wasted $75 of recording time or rehearsal time. So just watch out for abbreviations like this, like where it could mean several different things. Just write it out, show us what you mean. All right, so that was a huge amount of time spent on the D and E sections, and part of that is because I've kind of said so much about the scoring of A through C. But of course, you have your own approach, so I'm going to touch on some of those things and some common issues and so on and so forth. All right, so look, your prologue here, it's got some beautiful stuff in it. I really like the way that you progress the texture, and I think that's, I love the interaction of the parts and so on. I mean, there's no real huge problems in here. Harmony teacher might pick through a few parallel things, and so I mean, there might be some issues for them, but like just in terms of scoring, I don't have any huge problems with this. But I do have, speaking of harmony, I wonder if you have in any way improved Barvinsky's original conception of the harmony by adding so many extra notes to it. I mean, does it sound better, really? I mean, and to end on a minor chord rather than just ending on octaves, right? Has it improved? Now, the thing that probably is not improved, I would say, and this is no judgment of you and reinterpreting things, but so many people have chosen to make this decision to take what is originally a 6 chord and turn it into a minor chord simply by putting the melodic note on the bottom, right? So when you put the melody note on the bottom, which is originally the 6 of the major chord, so originally a D and an F sharp plus everything else above it. This D and this F sharp. The D and the F sharp plus the B equals a 6 chord, right? So it's a D major with, instead of an A on top, a B on top. But it's not a B minor chord by any stretch of the imagination. However, you put the melody note of B below it, and it becomes a B minor octave chord, right? And then here you end on an E minor. And so it sort of gives the music a kind of a sort of pseudo medieval / romantic kind of a feeling rather than the impressionistic feeling, right? So like that Barvinsky is experimenting, possibly influenced by the impressionistic vibe that was going around Europe at the time. And it wasn't just in France. There are other examples of impressionist trends in Germany, Italy. I mean, I could pick out half a dozen pieces, including this one that had those tendencies in the first decade, before, the people who were probably a little bit out of the mainstream of the way that Ravel and Debussy were starting to change things in France, and then which sort of spilled over to their friends, like Faya and other, like Villa-Lobos, and so on. People just picking up on that impressionism and reinterpreting it in their own voice. So yeah, so if we want to make that change harmonically, do we do a disservice to the music? Right? Which I think, I mean, I'm not saying that you do, but I'm saying you should ask yourself if you are doing that. Right? So just watch out for that, because it really changes the entire context of the music to turn these into minor chords rather than into six chords. Right? Because the whole idea of the impressionistic vibe of the beginning of this is that it is floating around, and it's not really settling, right? Until you get to the end, and the end is these E octaves, which are in the context of E minor, but he doesn't say E minor, right? So yeah, so those are some of the subtleties at play there. But other than that, I don't have any problem with the way that you dealt with the prologue. So now, right in here, you're setting yourself a slight problem, and that is each player being aware of the other one starting before them. And it really is anticipating the 12/8 to come, isn't it? To a degree. Although this still, you're starting off on beat 5, the beat 5.5, beat 6, beat 6.5. So this is the place where you should definitely write into your parts the previous notes, right? So I would, in my second violin part, I would show that the first violin had started off on this pitch, and then in my it's since this is going to be joint, this is going to be jointly presented in the second violin part. There won't be separate staves. That's all that's necessary. And the players will see, oh yeah, the first violin starts right on the fifth beat, and then we're coming in on 5.5, and then my stand partner is coming in on beat 6, right? And then the violas should have all of this above it. They should see, it's going just have it as a little cue, bum bum bum, and then they start, right? So that everybody really knows when to come in, because just like a general pause and other issues, of synchronizing players, this is one of those things that can really throw people in rehearsal and even in performance, right? Coming in a beat early or a beat late or a bar late, because they misinterpreted how the conductor was counting, or they were focusing on their part instead of looking at the conductor. Well, if they're focusing on their part, they should see what the conductor sees. Okay? All right, so this is one of the most delightful reinterpretations in here, of this dotted rhythm, right? It's just so lovely. Such great work, man. And I like the way that you have the pizzicato running through here with the dotted rhythm above in your lower winds, I guess we could say. And then the just leading right into that middle voice, which you've stretched across your upper voices and so on. Yeah, and then just the little English horn part in here, and the little French horn heartbeat thing starting. Really, really nice. Once again, really powerful melody, the way that it's scored across all the parts in the strings, but it works. What I would do is I would just say, if you are listening to it and you just feel, well, maybe the melody is too thick, then it could very well be that certain voices could be used to bolster what's going on in your winds, if you feel that unless you feel that is interfering with the whole wind solo aspect of this. Certainly, you're not doing these these secondary parts any favors by pushing up to a mezzo forte here, right? So, like, how can we really get the clarity of this if you really are, shoving into the dynamic so severely from the beginning? So, watch out for that. Yeah, and then here you say poco poco crescendo above the staff. I don't know what this means. You already have a poco crescendo here in the hairpin. Yeah, just leftover artifact, right? Try to erase those. Yeah, and I think this is all really lovely. Just, no complaints, just comments, really. I feel it's really nicely done. And I think the horns are working beautifully with the strings. So are the clarinets and your upper winds here. Yeah, nice work. And then here we get to B. Da, 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 da. And here's where you really come into your own. This, you're really playing to your own strengths right in here. That's I think that this all works great. The contrabassoon working with the tuba, keeping it soft in synchronization with some aspects of the double basses here, and then just the way that you are climbing up here with these dotted rhythms, beautiful. And you're really setting up what's to come, right? So the only question is, are you using up the textural intrigue and freshness, right? So if you are saying all these lovely things here, and setting up a beautiful sprightly leap across the wind texture up here, how we used up the innovative quality of that by the time we get to here. And certainly, like, the dotted rhythm here is a wonderful way of reinterpreting those wandering lines. But I love the string accompaniment here. I think that's absolutely perfect. You do not need this. Just have the diminuendo hairpin. People will get that they're supposed to fade down to nothing. Here I would say, and the same thing, like, have all the dynamics match. This should be pianissimo, not piano. So diminuendo down to triple P here, and then a further diminuendo hairpin, and you don't need anything at the end. Okay? All right, and then this is very cool. You go to non-dotted rhythms, and that's a wonderful contrast. Okay? Now, here's where I think you run into trouble. Like, what is the meaning of the piano score? Da, 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 nothing accompanying. Da, 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 do, dee, do, do, no, da, da, da. Then you settle on something, right? But here you are supplying harmony notes that are not in the piano score. You're supplying a upper pedal in the violins that is not in the score. This is all completely unnecessary. You have scored this beautifully across your winds. You don't even need this note or this note or this note, right? You don't need the cushion of accompaniment. Barvinsky is telling you something in the piano score, and that is, there's a part of me that just wants to get out of this comfortable middle-class house with my dad and my mom. They're really nice to me. They're sweet. They support me. But I'm looking at that countryside out there, those fields of wheat, that beautiful blue sky. I want to just start walking, and I don't want to come back, and I don't want to think about where I'm going to end up, right? So here's the urge to explore, and the urge further to explore, even greater. And here, he's coming from a place of comfort and stability, and then boom, he is completely out on his own, and we don't know where he's headed. We don't know where it's going. Why tell us where he's heading harmonically? Don't tell us. Don't give it away. Don't give away the game. The more you hold back on all this other stuff, the more beautiful. And I mean, even if it's like completely obvious by the context of the wandering melody where we're headed, it is just so much more beautiful to just give it to us here and not lead to it here. Okay? Just let it happen. Don't force it to evolve. It doesn't evolve. Barvinsky he's off on a jaunt. He's walking around. Where is he headed? He doesn't know. It's a Sunday. right? He's finished with church. I don't know if his parents went to church, but he's finished with church. He's walking around. He's off into the, he's off into the woods and the countryside, and walking through a strange village, and all of a sudden he's in a new place where there is a beautiful sense of tranquility on the surface, and yet a restless undercurrent, right? And you have scored that beautifully. I think the restless undercurrent really gets, like, if you just have little fluctuations here, that's fine. All you need are little fluctuations. So this is a little unclear. So do you mean that all of this is meant to be rolled? Because that's what it seems like when you put a diminuendo all the way to a rest, to the triple P on the rest. So yeah, so this is another point of complete unclarity. If you just used this approach on your timpani rolls, it would all be completely clear in an instant. But it's unclear. Raised hand at rehearsal, $75. Right? I should force my evaluation entrants, my participants, to start their own rehearsal, raised hand at rehearsal swear jars, right? Or not swear jars, but jars. Like, every time they create something that would cause a raised hand at rehearsal, put money in the jar and just save up that money. So yeah, really, seriously, use the standard roll mark of today. Don't use the trill mark of 200 or 300 years ago. All right. So yeah, so I like the restless undercurrent, the tremolos here. I think you really get a lot of what Barvinsky's intentions here. Really nicely done. And then, the interpretation of the melody was nice. It gets very, very heavy on the melody, but that's all right. I think that you have really captured a beautiful balance here, and you've even given yourself room to go off on, to take things in a very cool direction. And I already commented on some of this. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking there's no way that you don't intend this to be slurred, right? I mean, I don't think you really want to go taka 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 trill. I think you intend this to be da da ya. So if this is meant to be slurred, if this sounds better slurred, if that is better slurred, I mean, where's the slurs here? Da ta, right? Shouldn't that be part of it too? But yeah. So add some slurs, right? And I think that this will all sound really beautiful. Maybe don't sit at fortissimo for the better part of 2 bars. I think that this is fine, and I don't even think you need to get up to fortissimo. Right, with everything else going on? Who else is playing fortissimo? Nobody. Crescendo to forte. That's all, and you don't even need the crescendo to forte. Mezzo forte, crescendo marks, there's an implied forte in the middle here, right? So just get rid of that. Just get rid of all that. Just go mezzo forte, hairpins, nothing in the middle. Get rid of this mezzo forte mark. You don't need to say it again. We're still at mezzo forte. Crescendo. Don't leave it there for too long. Just have your little pulses in the middle here. And I think everything... I see what you're doing here. Like, you want this to stay strong while you push everything up to a forte. So if that's what you want, that's great, but not to fortissimo. Because then you won't be able to really hear the melody all that well, even though you've doubled it in a bunch of other parts. It'll be obscured in your strings, right where you don't want it, right? Okay. And then here, obviously, this is not... Yeah, so the sempre crescendo you intended for these other parts, and this is just awful. Get rid of this. Don't have don't put your dynamic marks above when they're intended below. Get rid of sempre crescendo. Get rid of the very, very slow, confusing, long-lasting crescendo hairpin, and just put in pianissimo below this, poco poco crescendo, right? Yeah, and I would almost like crescendo. Do you really want this to be forte? What if it was mezzo? What if it were mezzo forte, and then diminuendo down, right? Because this is only going up to mezzo forte here, right? Anyways, managing dynamics. It's an art, not a science, but it really, really does have a scientific outcome. And this is weird. Forte, crescendo to mezzo forte. I don't get it. What do you mean? Is this something? Is this just a copy paste error? What's going on here? And then it was forte. It was mezzo forte before. Yeah, it's just unclear. Yeah, so you got a lot of editing to do here. But yeah, but I mean, such a cool score. I mean, I don't think it is. It is ready to go to the stands, but I do think that it is something that you should explore in terms of seeing how good you can get this if there's a possibility of it being performed, right? So think about some of the things I've said. Maybe like a kind of a shortcut, like you don't need to like say, well, Thomas, like could you? I really do have an opportunity of this being performed. Can I have a coaching session with you? I'd say don't even worry about that. Just go check out the last 12 entries and just watch my commentaries on them. And I think that will give you everything you need to get this score in shape, along with all the commentary I've already given you. Okay? But it's a fine score, Noel. Like here I'm picking it apart. I'm dissecting it on the table with formaldehyde and a scalpel. So that cannot be fun in a certain way, but at the same time, like don't lose sight of the fact that I'm very impressed by your score, and I think it's just gorgeous. You're solving all these problems in ways that that I didn't, right? So like that for one, you're introducing elements of your own that are powerful and effective, like these little runs that you have going through here, or like the dotted rhythm and everything else. So it's just a very worthy score. Try to get it performed. Yeah, that's my suggestion. But think about some of those suggestions that I also made. I think an audience would love this, and so would the musicians. Nice work. So, like, there's nothing left for me to say except thanks. Thank you for helping me help the people who grew up on this and who are a part of this musical culture, who are starving, houses blown apart, lives destroyed. I mean, I'm glad that we were able to help them. I mean, that doesn't make us any, exceptional human beings. Everybody should be helping them. But it's, we're doing our part, and I think that's important. And I'm really, really glad that you were a part of that. And along with my other Patreon participants and my website subscribers and viewers who spread the word, thank you guys so much. And I know some of you have made your own contributions. That means a lot. But even without all of that, you supporting the channel and on Patreon and helping me and my family survive, and helping me make the time to improve a lot of other composers and get their craft going and share resources with them. That's also priceless, and I really value your role and your presence in the community. Thank you so much for that. So. That's pretty much all I've got to say about this, except that what a journey today has been. If you look over the three videos released today, which are actually done over 2 days, just because the first two were so intense, so incredibly intense, and I had to sort of jumble the order of release in order to get everything done. I just think that they are just a wonderful example of the incredible imagination in this community, and different influences, different tastes, different styles, different personal personal signatures. They really are pretty amazing. So thanks everybody for sharing that. It really means a lot to me, and it never ceases to amaze and delight me.